So I'm going to stream on Code Basics. I'm going to show how to do the basic code, but also some important coding. Okay, it seems to work. So first of all, you need to know that when you place a prop from the prop gallery, most of the time it won't have any brains, but some of them have got a default brain. Like for example, I put down an apple, and you can see that it has a default brain. So to access the brain, you click on the prop and you click on the brain icon. And also, you can access some of the default brains in the prop gallery. So here you have the prop gallery with a lot of very interesting brains. I would recommend you to look at them. Some of them are not that good, and a few have some mistakes, but most of them are really interesting, and you can learn about types and how to code basic stuff. Now I'm going to get rid of this brain and explain everything from scratch. So, as you can see, you can add lines, and something which is important to note is that the lines will run sequentially. So first it will look at line 1, then line 2, then etc. And you have also got some pages, but it will only run one page, and I'll explain later how to use pages. So first of all, we're going to see how to use the code inside one page. So you have a when side, and you can put conditions, like for example, when left mouse button do, and if I hold my left mouse button, it will run the do side, but also all indented lines afterwards. So you could have a code like that with some other conditions here, for example. Let's see, when detect enemies, and all the lines that are here will run if the left mouse button is held and you detect enemies. And you have to also note that there is an else style. So I've just explained that if that is true, it will run all the do side and the indented lines. But if that is false, then you can add when else. It's in timing and logic, when else, and it will run only if that is false. And you have to remember that it has to be indented, so here it won't work. You can see that it shows a mistake. You have to put an indentation to make it work. So that's it for the else. And also, if you don't have anything in the when side, it just means that it will always run. So it's like when true, the same. And you have to remember that it's really important. The lines of code are run every frame, and there are 30 frames in a second, so it will run 30 times a second. So you can see, for example, that if I put create object gallery picker and some acorn, it will create 30 acorn a second. So that's it for the basics of the code. Now I'm going to talk about the tiles. It's really important to remember that the tiles in Project Spark have default behaviors. So for example, if I have left stick or was, I'm on the computer right now, so I'm using was, and it's movement move, was do move, then you can see that your character is moving. But this is actually a really complex code if you think about it, because when I press the D key, the right key, it will go right. When I press the left key, it will go left, etc. So what is happening in this move tile? Well, it's just that it has some basic, some defaults that are hidden, and you can modify all these by just using the modifiers. So for pretty much every tile, there will be modifiers afterwards, and you will be able to choose at which speed, for example, because we saw that it was going at a certain speed, and by default it's going at its I think it's the on-land speed. So if you go in movement ground speed, you can see this is the value that it is using. But if you want to move at another speed, you add at speed and some other number, and you can see that could put some 17, for example. You can see that it's going much faster. So now I really recommend that you look at all these modifiers each time you put a tile that you don't know. Look at its modifiers. You will learn a lot from them. And also, I really recommend that you don't use the search in the beginning, but really try to search in the folders, and you'll see the new tiles that may be useful. It's much better than using, for example, here I could type position, but I just get position, and that's much better to look in positioning, and you can see center, centroid, and you can see that there are a lot of tiles that maybe you didn't know of. So we recommend you to look at all these tiles and all their modifiers to change the default behaviors. So now I've talked about a little bit about the tiles, but it would be a bit too long to explain each and every one of them. So I'm only going to explain the variables now, what are their use, because they are obviously very, very useful, and how to use them. So what is a variable? Well, a variable is just something that contains a specific value. So I was saying that the variables could have several types. For example, there is the number type, which is just a normal number. You have the vector type. The vector is just a triplet of numbers. And I have done a tutorial on vectors. I'll give the link afterwards. Also, you have colors. You have a string, a text variable, so you can put some default text, and this is really important. You'll see why later with the pages. You also have object and object set. These are really important to keep track of objects, and this object set is important with something that I'll explain later. Is the for each of loop. And finally, the Boolean. So the Boolean, it's just true or false. And remember how I said that when you have something in the when side, it checks if it is true, and then if it is, it runs the do side. Well, that is called a Boolean statement. And in fact, you can put a Boolean here, and for example, I had test, and if that test is true, then it will run. You really don't use to put equal to true, because test equal to true is the same thing as when test, because this equal to true is evaluated to true anyway. So, and to test if that variable, that Boolean, is false, you can just put not in front of it. It's in timing and logic, not. So not test do. So that's it for Booleans. And there are also boom camera settings and fixed camera settings. They won't interest us in this topic. And finally, new brain. It's a new type of variable. It's about when you use brains, push brain, and add brains, because you can have several brains inside one prop. So I've said that you have each prop has its own brain, and I have forgotten to say that in fact you can have several brains for the same prop. It's called multi-brains, but I won't talk about it because it's a bit more complicated. So now here are the options for multi-brains here. So now I've talked about I think all the variable types, but there is something really important about these variables. Is the notion of local or global variables, and you can see here the global type. So a variable, if you don't put anything in front of it, it's a local variable. It's local to the prop it has been declared in. So this pause attack is a version of pause attack in this particular object. But if I had an apple next to it with the same variable, it's actually not the same variable. It's a local variable to the apple here. I can show that directly in the game. So to set a variable, you just have to put the variable equals something, or you can also use the increment by or decrement by type. here to increment it. So for example, here I'm setting pause attack to 1, and if I put pause attack increment by 2 afterwards, it will say that pause attack is equal to 1 plus 2, so it will be equal to 3. And now if I display this pause attack variable, you will be able to see, and I'm going to put above me, you will be able to see the 3 above the character. But here if I put pause attack equals 2, it's not the same value, but also it's not the same variable. So when I'm displaying pause attack in this prop, in this apple, it will display the value of the apple, so it will display 2. So let's see what it does. 3 and 2. So these are local variables. But now an important question would be that how could you access this pause attack variable of the player? How could you access it inside the apple? Well, you can put the object with the inward picker here, and then the variable, and it will say the variable pause attack of my wooden peasant. So that's how you can access it. You can also use an object variable here. So I've explained how object variables are interesting to store objects, to keep track of them. And this is a good example. You can keep track of them and change their variables. So I could have, for example, target pause attack equals 10. I'm going to use inward picker. And here we'll say to set the variable pause attack only once, so it will be equal to 3. And then, because of that code, it will be equal to 10. And that code runs always because it has nothing in its one side. So it will be equal to 10 in pretty much all of the game, and you will see 10 above it. So that's how you use local variables of other props. And one thing which is important, again because of multi-brains, the local variables aren't local to one brain, it's local to a prop. So if I had several brains using the same pause attack variable in this apple, then all the brains would modify the same pause attack variable of the apple. So this is important to remember. So now you can see how local variables are interesting because they are specific to one prop, and you can access them with this with these object with inward picker or object variables. But what if you have a variable that you want to be accessible in all ways, but also which isn't specific to one object? So for example, the score. If you have a score and the score isn't really specific to one of your props, then you could use what is called a global variable. So global, and here score, and you can set it, let's say for example 10. And now if I go inside this player brain, this pleasant brain, I can say display global score. And something which is important to note is that this global variable is unique. It's only one variable in the entire game. So that's why it's not specific to one prop. And if you change its value, it will change the value for everything, for all props. So now I've set the global score to 10 in the apple, and my character displays it. And you can see it displays fine. So global variables can be useful also, for example, for if you want to store your player, you can say, well, in my player, I set a variable at the beginning, global player, with an object variable. So global player equals me. And now you can use the global player in every brain, and it'll be much better than the Team Dakota brain type, because they have a type for the player. I can type it. But this is really bad. You don't want to use that, and actually I'm just going to show it. You can see that you can put an object variable, for example, but in fact you cannot put any real variables. It's not like you can use the local variable of player, like if I were to use global player. You can see here, if I use global player, I can set the value test of my global player, but with the player type I can't. And the reason for that is that the player type isn't an object. This is really important to keep in mind. Player is an object set. It's not an object. So what it is really, it's just the object set containing all props that contains a control in its first stage. So for example, if I put some controls here, like left mouse button, then the player will be the apple. And it's still an object set. It's not the object apple, it's an object set containing the apple. If I put, for example, a goblin with also some controls, like the controller A, then these two are contained in the player type. And I can show it. If I put for each of player display it will display all my objects contained in the object set. And you can see, well, I'm going to dezoom a little bit. You can see that the player type is the object set containing the goblin and the apple. So you can now really understand why a global player would be useful. So this line will be in a lot of your games. So now I've talked about the variables. I would like to talk about the brains, the order in which they run, before getting into too much details about the code, the types. So I'm going to do a little thing. I'm going to set a global variable test, global number variable, and I'm going to increment it by 1. Something that I haven't said, and this is important. When you don't specify a value for your variable, but you use it for the first time, for example with an increment by, or if you're doing a test or anything really, the variable by default will be, for a number variable it will be 0, for a boolean it will be false, for an object it will be nothing, so nothing this. For an object set it will be an empty object set. For a text variable it will be an empty string. For a vector it will be 0, and I can show it 0 exists. It's a type, so vector equals. Now if you go into values, you can see 0. So by default vector will be equal by 0 if you don't set it. And color will be equal to no color. So I can show it. Equals it's I think yes, no color. So this is what they are by default. So when I'm incrementing by 1, the first prop to increment that global test variable will have to do global test for 0 plus 1. Then the next one will do global test plus 1. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. And the third prop will do the same, so 2 plus 1 equals 3. So with that code, we'll be able to see in which order the brains run. I'm going to use display to show the values above. Now, if I put this code inside all my props, they'll all display 3 because by the end of the first frame, the global test will be equal to 3. So for all the next frames, my global test will be equal to 3. But I don't want that. I want to see the order of the brain. So I'm going to use a local variable which will be equal to global test, and it will be set only once, so it won't be set to 3 the frame after. And I'm going to display this test variable. So if I do that, you'll see that since I'm setting a global test to 1, then 2, then 3, and each of these props out there have their local variables test 1, 2, and 3. They'll display above them the values 1, 2, and 3, and we'll see in which order their brains run. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. You would say, well, it seems like it's the first prop that I put in the game, then the second one, then the third one. But actually, if I had to restart, you can see that it changes the order. This is important. The order of the brains isn't kept from one to the next. So you don't want to rely on order of brains, they'll change. It's random. So you have to keep in mind that you need to have a code that doesn't have this type of things. There's using a global test, for example, incrementing it, and in the same frame using it inside another prop, because either this brain, the brain of my player will run first, and then the global test will have a value of 1, or the goblin's brain will run first, and then the global test will be equal to 0 when it runs that time. So you obviously don't want that. So really be careful with the order of the brains. And also something to note about the multi-brains. It's not, we could think that it works like you have a prop, it runs all its brains. If it has several brains, then it goes to the next prop. But that's actually false. The brains order is really random, and you have to remember that the brains can be separated. So if you have several brains, like for example you have a brain A and a brain B inside this prop, and these have only one brain, well, it could be that the brain A runs first, then brain of the apple, then brain of the goblin, and then only then the brain B of that prop runs. So the order of the brains, even with multi-brains, isn't really well. You can't do things with if you rely on the order of the brains, even with multi-brains, you'll see that it won't work. So you really have to be careful with that. So now I've talked about the order of the brains, and I would like to talk about the next page, how to change page. And you can do that with the tiles that are inside the, well, I can find it. Yes, I think it's in brain. So here, brains, you can see switch page and call page. So these are really different. And switch page, what does it do? Well, when you run this line, switch page, and you have to precise which page you want to go to. Oh, sorry. So you can put next page or previous page. You can also put a number, the number of the page. So you could put switch page 2. But you can also put the name of the page, and that's how I would recommend to do it, because you can really see where you're going to. So when you'll read your code, you'll understand where you go to with that switch page, and it'll be easier to read. And something which is cool is that if you put a brain name of the page before you use the switch page, you'll be able to search it. So I've called my page main, and I can search it. It is recorded in the text variables. I can show it. It's in text. You can see main, So you can rename a page, and then you can search it and be quicker. And what this switch page main does is that it is going to go to this page, and it will begin to run it from the next frame. It won't run it immediately, it will run it from the next page, and it will stay on that page. So for example, I could have an init page where I init all my variables. For example, true, etc. And I init everything, and then switch page main. And at the second frame of the game, I have this main page which will run continuously. So this is really useful, and you actually want to have an init page like that if you want to restart your game, because for the moment there isn't a restart time. So to restart, you'll have to reinitialize all your variables. So it's really important to keep that in mind when you begin the game, because you have to prepare it. You have to know that you need to reinitialize all your variables, need to create all the objects that have been destroyed during your game if you want to do a restart option. So this way of doing the code with an init page and a main page is really great, because once you have finished the game, you could have a game over page, for example, and you can ask the player to press a button. So let's say space pressed, and when you press space, then you switch page init, and it will reinitialize all your variables, and you will be good to go again. So that is a good way to do your code. But remember that the player tile, this thing that I've talked about, is checking your first page, the first page it runs, and if it has controls, then it is the player tile will contain it. But if it doesn't contain any kind of controls, then it won't be in the player. So you could have a player with only controls in the second page, but you can't use the player tile then, because the player won't contain your prop if you don't have a control inside the init page. So this is another reason why this player isn't really a good thing. You really want to, for example, you could initialize your global player here. So that would be a good way to code it. So now I've talked about switch page. I haven't talked about the second option you have, which is code page. Code page is really important. This is a great way to organize your brains. So code page. First, something really important, don't put next page or previous page. Not only is it really difficult to read, you won't understand the code with a code page next page, but it also bugs. So if you use it, you might see that it doesn't work sometimes. So don't use this with code page. Second thing, I also don't really recommend to use number. Really, you have to put a string here, a text variable, to be able to read your code afterwards, to understand it. And this code page is a great way to organize code, so if you use them wisely, other people will be able to understand your code, and that's a great thing. So I could have a code page, for example, let's say move. And this code page is really cool. It will go to the move page that's created, and it will run the move page. And then it will continue in the same page. It doesn't switch to that page, it just runs the code in move, and then it continues. So it's really great. You can use it you can in fact use it for functions. If you're a programmer, you'll know what it is. It's kind of like a function. And you could send it, you could send arguments to it, you could set some variables before you call the page and use these variables in the move page, and you could set some variables at the end before you quit in the page, and you'll be able to use them afterwards. And also I want to talk about a little tile in the time and logic. Where is time and logic? Well, it's not in timing and logic. It's in brains again. So in brains, you have something called done executing. This tile will stop executing the brain. So if you encounter the done executing somewhere and you have some code afterwards, these lines won't run. So that's great if you want to put some condition here and you don't want the code afterwards to run if that condition is met, then just do when condition do done executing. But also what is cool with done executing, and I've already said, if you have a new tile, look at all its modifiers, you'll learn a lot. And you can see a call page here. This done executing call page won't stop the brain, but it will only stop this page if I have called it. So if I have in my main page some code, then I call it, I have a done executing here, so every code afterwards won't run, but it will continue to run all these lines afterwards, after the call page. And also you have a for each of for the for each of loop. So this is also useful. I'm going to explain it afterwards when when I talk about the for each of loop. So call page is really a great thing, and the way you could use it, you could have your init page, then main page, and in your main page you put nearly nothing about except for call page, some call pages, and it is a great way to organize your code, because you'll just have to read all the call page. You'll see what it does, and if you want to change a specific code, you know you have to go to that specific page, and you won't have some huge page if you have a ton of code, of complex code. Well, all this complex code, you can put it inside the specific page dedicated to it. So For example, if you have a complex selection code in an RTS game, you will be able to call the page selection, and all the complex code will be in selection, but you won't have to scroll through the page and have to pass by this selection code, because it'll just be one line called page select. So that's a great way to organize code. Now, I've talked about how to organize the pages, and I'm going to talk, finally, I want to say, about the timing and logic. So, the timing and logic, well, actually I'm going to cut the stream so that it does a second part, because it's really different from everything I said earlier.